Welcome again, viewers and subscribers. This week we want to take a look at a detailed report given by the Firearms Licensing Authority head, Mr. Shane Darling. Let's look at it, listen to what he has to say, and then come back for comments.
We not carry lies to feed them, and you feed one. We not hide no nana sell.
I want to state that I joined the FLA in 2017, June. At the time of my joining of the FLA, I noticed that there are certain persons who were getting gun licenses, and the method used was questionable. I brought it to the then chairman of the board's attention. The first alert was raised in June, the same month that I joined the FLA, of a letter from a superintendent in Westmoreland outlining 2 pages of adverse finding on an individual that was involved in lotto scamming and gang activities who had secured a firearm license. And my checks revealed that the person did receive the firearm license, although the board was aware that he was involved in nefarious activities. The board of the FLA then resigned in August. It is to be noted that the deputy chairman at the time was Dennis Meadows. After a review by MOCA and the administration of the FLA, headed by myself, we discovered hundreds of criminal elements from Westmoreland, St. James, Trelawney, Manchester, Clarendon, who received gun licenses, although the police had warned against granting any such license to those individuals. They range from convicted murderers, persons who had conviction for illegal possession of firearm, robbery with aggravation, rape, drug trafficking, and let me state it categorically clear here, that those information were present on the file before the board granted the approval. And during the time that Mr. Meadows served on the FLA board, he signed every single one of them approving them.
Imagine that. Imagine that. Criminals are being given gun licenses left, right, and center. Huh? How sad it is that an agency that is supposed to be about the well-being, the protection of the citizens of this country are issuing permits to a dangerous weapon to people of criminal mentality, to people of criminal intent. I said it in a couple of programs ago that there's 2 Jamaicas, one for the haves, one for the have-nots. And in this case, the haves are the ones with money. It's regardless if they're of good standing, it doesn't matter once they have their money. And some of these guys, imagine a man who is honest, hardworking, go to try and get a licensed firearm to protect his life, property, and family. Can't, because he don't have a bag of money in the bank, and he doesn't have the interconnections that some of these gang members, some of these criminals have. Yeah, some of these musicians. So we come back to see the artists again. Jamaica, it's time we clean up our home. It's time we clean up our act. Too much links and dons and people who have the links are getting by, while the true persons are persons who really need things to happen are being shafted. Peter Phillips did say, those who play by the rules get shafted. These inferences are clear indication of such statement. People who are honest and hardworking, want to do the right thing, and are not being afforded such amenities. But give it to criminals because they have their dons, they have their links, and they have their money. Well connected. Sad.
And I'll go further to state to you that there are cases so blatant that the board on which Mr. Meadows sat and he signed denied initially that individual the firearm license on the basis that they said the persons were not fit and proper. And mere weeks later, the same members of the board who denied the person picked up the file and granted the person the license. One such case is a gentleman convicted in Mandeville of illegal possession of firearm and ammunition, and he was sentenced. He was found in a car with an illegal firearm and was arrested by the police and went to court and pled guilty and was sentenced. That gentleman later applied for a firearm license. The board of the FLA denied him the license on the basis that he had a conviction and that he had lied on his application that he never had that conviction. Yet, without a new application or without any appeal being filed by the gentleman, the very said board granted him a license 3 months later. So a convicted criminal who had an illegal firearm is now granted a legal firearm by the Firearm Licensing Authority Board. And it is curious what the board said. The board said that after interviewing the gentleman and noting the sentence that was imposed by the court on him seemed to be below the minimum that the law requires for the gentleman to be given. And therefore, they are going to side on the side of leniency and grant this gentleman a firearm license. That is one. The other case is that of Jacure.
Jacure is the first human being on Earth, the planet, to make music from prison.
Jacure, as the public would know, was convicted of rape, robbery with aggravation, and illegal possession of firearm and ammunition, and was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. At the time of the sentence, it was 1999, and 15 years would take him to 2014. Jacure later applied for a firearm license. All the report by the investigators, the director of investigation, the police, went against Jacure getting a license. The board of the FLA at the time, on which Mr. Meadows was the deputy chairman, and which Mr. Meadows signed, denied Jacure a license in June 2016 on the basis that he is not fit and proper to hold a firearm. About 10 weeks later, the very said Dennis Meadows signed approving Jacure in getting a firearm license. No appeal, no new application. The decision is granted for him to get a license.
It's preposterous. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. It's untenable. Criminals are being given permits to carry a licensed firearm. People who are convicts, convicted of the same thing to do in regards to gun.
Now, I want to state that my check so far reveal over 200 such cases of persons with criminal trace, criminal conviction, who have been approved firearm licenses. Now, I want to state that once a person is granted a licensed firearm, that person now has access to legal rounds of ammunition, which means that person can walk into any firearm dealership to acquire ammunition legally. Now, a Don in the corporate area got 4 gun licenses through the FLA. A man extradited to the United States and returned was allowed 4 gun licenses. What was curious is that the board was reversing decisions of the previous board, meaning one board would deny the license on the basis that the person is not fit and proper, and although the new board had no new application before it or no new information, they were picking up the files out of the registry and approving the persons on a willy-nilly basis. And that is how several criminal elements got licenses. Now, I want to bring to your attention the fact that the corruption at the FLA did not start. It spanned over a period of time, spanning back to, I would say, based on my checks, 2014. Now I'd like to bring the media's attention to an article that was published in the newspaper in 2015 by the Gleaner. This article says, Director resigned following probe at the Firearm Licensing Authority. This was an announcement made in the Parliament by the then Minister of National Security, Peter Bunting. And I'd like to share with you today the background of this. The director at the time of the FLA, a director working at the FLA, sought to extort persons millions of dollars in securing firearm licenses. The director approached a senior civil servant to collect money from the civil servant to receive his firearm license. The civil servant went to Mocha to advise Mocha that he was being extorted, and a sting operation was set up by Mocha to catch the director. The civil servant expressed fear later and didn't go through with the sting operation. And the director later discovered that this was the case and tendered his resignation. The report was submitted to the Ministry of National Security, and the minister at the time was aware when he said to Parliament the director had resigned because of an investigation. This was from 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. Nothing was done to characterize the issue at the FLA after that. In fact, it mushroomed among the staff. And it was now widespread what was taking place. So the Ministry of National Security was aware of what was happening as far back as 2015. In fact, there's correspondence from the Ministry of National Security, from the then permanent secretary to the board of the FLA, that they're warning them to cease a practice that they were carrying out. And that practice was one in which, when the very board denied a person an application for firearm license, that person was appealing now to the minister. And while the person was appealing to the minister, the board of the FLA granted the license to the individual while the matter was on appeal to the minister. The ministry became aware of that and warned the FLA of it, but nothing was done to prevent it from continuing. In fact, it continued with hundreds of other applications. And as I said before, I will make myself available to every media house, and I'll present the facts and the files to the board, to the public, for you to view for yourself. My days of remaining silent are over. I am going to speak on every single matter to explain to the public why the constant attack on my character and my reputation is taking place.
Jamaica, we must do better. And for those who are talking about the corruption under the administration, this goes under both administrations. And for those who want to jump on a political bandwagon, I don't think this one is the one that you should, because it happened under both administration, and for years it has been happening. It is interesting that failed former National Security Minister Peter Bunting is calling for the sacking of Shane Darling, the man who is actually doing something about the FLA. Under his watch, corruption loomed, right? And now he's calling for the sacking of Darling because he's exposing them. Sad. Really sad. Failed politician, failed former National Security Minister calling for somebody who's actually doing something to be sacked. Laughable. I am happy. Exposure is coming to the fore, and once it is exposed, it is into the light, then we can do something about it. Whether you like it or not, or want to disregard it, it is a fact that there is significant amount of corruption coming to light under this government. Not necessarily it is only happening under this administration, but it is under this administration that it is coming to the light. So maybe something is happening where transparency is taking place, and that's a good thing. One might see it and get shade and say, boy, the administration corrupt. No, not necessarily the case, because this has been happening over a period of time. You understand? But it is coming to light under this administration. So there may be some level of transparency, and where there's transparency, you can have accountability. That's what we need. I guarantee you that this cesspool that's happening at the Firearms Licensing Authority will not go back to this, will not go back there, and things have to change. Things have to change.
Faced with this reality, as the CEO, I had to address these issues of staffing. There are some persons who I fired. There are some persons who I negotiated a separation with in order to purge the entity of what was taking place. I must tell you, it was widespread. From the Mandeville office to the Montego Bay office to right here in Kingston. And I had to use the means available to me to address this matter. During the period where persons were getting gun licenses under questionable circumstances, everybody made money from it. So the ranges made money, because each time you attend on a range for training, you had to pay. The dealers made money because they were selling far more firearms and ammunition because of the sheer number of persons who were getting gun licenses. In fact, during the period 1 year, dealers sold $1.2 billion worth of firearms, based on the sheer volume of persons who were getting gun licenses. So the dealerships across the country benefited from the corrupt practices of the FLA. Now, based on the restrictionist approach that is taken now, it has resulted in far less persons getting firearm licenses, and the board has been quite stringent in this decision as to who gets firearm licenses. Now that has led to a lowering of the sales and by extension their profits. And of course, the dealers, I'm aware, and several other persons have lobbied for my removal from the FLA because they feel that the policies being implemented are strict and are affecting their business. I can share this with you today, that the chairman of the board, Colonel Carter, was lobbied extensively by special interest groups who wanted him or wanted to force his hands not to renew my contract 2 years ago. And they have lobbied members of parliament to also push the government in that direction. The board has taken a stance in revoking all the licenses that were issued under questionable circumstances. Now it has therefore affected a wide scale, a cross-section of the entire country. Persons who had firearms for years, they are being revoked at the moment. And naturally, it will affect sales, and it will affect those individuals who sold them the licenses in the first place. So while I understand the attacks that persons have launched on social media, I am not going to relent in terms of policy that are implemented. I want to state finally, because I'm putting everything on the table here, that the president of the Civil Service Association, Mr. O'Neill Grant, has taken an approach from 2017 on a campaign, I should say, to have me removed from the FLA. Mr. Grant wrote to the former Minister of National Security, Robert Montague, demanding that I be removed from the FLA. Mr. Grant went as far as writing to the General Legal Counsel, which is the body responsible for attorney, reporting that I had broken the law and therefore suggesting that I should be disciplined. Mr. Grant also has gone on public radio to state that he has reported me to the police for union busting tactics at the FLA. That didn't stop there. When my contract was to be renewed in 2020, Mr. Grant wrote 9 pages of a letter to the Prime Minister of Jamaica, demanding that the Prime Minister, who didn't employ me, should seek to ensure that my contract is not renewed. And what Mr. Grant was seeking to do is to have political interference in the operation of the FLA. Prime Minister didn't employ me, so the Prime Minister could not fire me. Now, what Mr. Grant has not told the public is that his brother was an employee of the FLA. Mr. Grant has not told the public why his brother left the FLA. And I believe when persons in public space makes public comments that they should declare their interest in matters. Mr. Grant's brother worked at the FLA prior to my going there and was sent home on administrative leave by the then CEO and was sent on leave until his contract expired and was advised that he should not return to the FLA as his services are no longer needed. When I got to the FLA, Mr. Grant's brother friends were still working there, and several of them were relieved of their duty by me. I think it's important for the public to understand and contextualize issues. And so when persons from the standpoint of a union speaks, I think it's important they should tell the public their interests in the matters on which they speak. But I will not relent as it relates to the policy positions and the administrative direction of the FLA. I cannot determine who will get a gun license because it rests with the board of the entity. But as it relates to the processes, application and investigation, the integrity of that process will be maintained, and I will try my best to free that process from the corruption that took place prior. And so all the attacks that may come will have to continue because I am not stopping, and I'll show the public the extent and the nature of several persons out there who have licensed firearms who should not have it. And it begs the question as to whether this is contributing to the very crime problem. Because where you have criminals with licensed firearms having access to legal rounds of ammunition, it compromises the national security of the country.
Honest people cannot be denied a permit. When criminals who flush their money, you don't know if they get it from. Some of them rob, thief, and kill, and maim, and murder to get it. And they are the ones who are given such amenity. It is wrong. It is wrong. Jamaica, clean up. Clean up, clean up. And you, the viewers, you, the John public, are also a part of helping to hold government accountable. Right? It's all of us. It's not just the boy, the politician, them. It takes the public to push political will. It can be done. I am of the view that Jamaica is too small to have so much problems and it cannot be addressed. It can be. And that's why I'm sticking with this country. That's why I'm not run we're going away, because I have to do what I can do to help get Jamaica out of this quagmire. It can happen. It should happen. And by God, it will happen. That's my take for it this week, my peeps. Bless you.